Let's get started right away. And I want to start by talking about the coaching carousel that the rumors are already swirling. And I think you have to start by talking about the University of Michigan and talking, of course, about Jim Harbaugh. My Wisconsin Badgers, Tony, got the best of Jim Harbaugh this last week. That was not a close game. That was a very ugly game. Certainly not a great look for Jim Harbaugh. And for somebody who came in kind of touted as the person who was going to, be able to bring Michigan to the promised land, beat Ohio State, be the team in the Big Ten, hasn't exactly gone to fruition. What are you hearing about Jim Harbaugh and his prospects at Michigan moving forward?
Hasn't worked out at all. I mean, the second year in a row they lost to Wisconsin. They were never even in the game. I mean, they can't beat Ohio State even when they're expected to beat Ohio State. And then they go to a second or third tier bowl game and they lose that. So, I mean, you're right. It's not worked out. I think the thing with Harbaugh is he's one of those coaches where if it works early. Because if it doesn't work early, it kind of falls off the cliff and he wears thin with everybody. So, I mean, short of him somehow pulling out a miracle and beating Ohio State, which I don't think it's going to happen because Ohio State is head and shoulders a better football team, never mind a more talented football team, a better coach football team. I think Harbaugh's days in Michigan are numbered. I wrote this during the Game Day blog last Saturday. It's been picked up, not my quotes, but the feeling that Harbaugh's on his way out at Michigan by the end of the season. The question is, does he end up in the NFL in 2021?
Well, you beat me to my next question, and my follow-up, Tony, is, what are the odds? Does he go to a different college school? Does he end up, making his way back to the NFL? And if he does go to the NFL, is there going to be interest in him at the NFL level for a coach that maybe had some struggles at Michigan?
There's not going to be a lot of interest. I should say this. Let me start again. I'm not hearing there's a lot of interest. And I've compared this in the question and answer segment of Pro Football Network to what I was hearing about Matt Rule a year ago, where I was reporting outwardly that Rule was going to be the hottest head coaching prospect from the college ranks when everyone talks about this guy or the Oklahoma coach, and Matt Rule was. I'm not hearing anything like that about Jim Harbaugh. For a variety of reasons, he just does not fit the profile of the head coaches or teams that want a head coach, a new head coach to be in 2021. There's a lot that goes into that. And the fact is this, I'm sure he's going to get interviews. I don't think he's going to be at the top of the list for anyone to get a head coaching job. It could be a situation like Adam Gase in the sense that you may have a team that's running out of warm bodies, and you may have a coach that really wants a job, and they hire a Jim Harbaugh. I think the odds are against Jim Harbaugh getting a head coaching job in the NFL, but it's not out of the realm of possibility.
You mentioned earlier that, if Jim Harbaugh is going to succeed, he's going to succeed early. Right. A coach that, kind of had that same sort of thing was Rex Ryan to some extent. Yeah. Do these kind of coaches, I kind of view them as kind of having a shelf life where they can come in, they can maybe invigorate your program for a little bit. You try to have some early success with them, but in a way it's a ticking time bomb. And at some point, that style of coaching and maybe the bravado and how you speak to the media and everything like that, again, it has a shelf life, and eventually it's going to wear thin and things maybe don't end as the way that they started. Do you see that with Jim Harbaugh in a similar way to like a Rex Ryan?
Absolutely. I mean, with Jim Harbaugh, you can't bring him in for a rebuilding process. I don't think it's going to work. You got to bring him into a situation like the Houston Texans. I'm not saying it's going to work at Houston Texans, but a situation where a team is close and just needs a few pieces, and maybe Harbaugh is able to push them over those last final hurdles.
It'll be interesting to see what happens if he is, in fact, on the outs with Michigan, where he ends up, and if he actually gets a head coaching gig, whether it be in the NFL or on the college football level. Let's stick in the state of Michigan. We're going to go from college to NFL. Let's talk about Matt Patricia, who I think also has underwhelmed in his time in Michigan, this time obviously with the Detroit Lions, another kind of interesting Bill Belichick coach who hasn't exactly worked out to its fullest extent. They suffer another loss last week. And where do things go from here for Detroit with Matt Patricia?
Unless somehow they turn it around in a big way, the last month and a half of the season, Patricia's on his way out. There's no doubt about it. That's what I'm hearing. I mean, 13-27 the last 2.5 seasons. Really from the get-go, there were questions or there were concerns about his relationship with the players, and the players really didn't like him, and his personality didn't wear well with the players. So Patricia's out, but I think, it's a situation. You talk about Rex Ryan with the New York Jets. I think it's a situation in Detroit where, like the New York Jets, doesn't matter what coach they bring in because it all starts with ownership. And ownership in Detroit is a big percentage of the problem, if not the vast majority of the percentage of the problem. So whether it's Patricia or who else it is, unless ownership really steps up or even steps back and brings the right people in and lets those people do the job, I don't think it makes that much of a difference. But the word is unless there's some sort of miraculous turnaround, the last month and a half of the season, Patricia is going to be out in Detroit.
Yeah, a team that's definitely disappointing. Matt Stafford not having the season that I think a lot of people expected him to have. When you say that this is more of an ownership issue, is this that they're getting too involved, that they don't care? Is it negligence? Is it a Dan Snyder issue where, again, they're just overbearing and want things done and aren't letting the personnel people do the personnel work? Or where's that shatter point within the organization? Yeah,
I'm not close to the organization, but from what I gather with people, it's sort of too much of a hands-off situation. We saw it with Matt Millen. I mean, they let Matt Millen run roughshod, and the franchise really almost buried the franchise. And I think it's a situation that they bring people in that they like rather than people who can properly do the job and bring the right people in to do that job.
Speaking of Matt Millen, if any of the Detroit Lions ownership is listening, Tony and I are available. We will absolutely run the Detroit Lions. I think we can do a better job than Matt Millen did. So we've got a lot of ideas here at the NFL Draft Insiders podcast. So listen in, and we got you covered. Although it'd be a little bit tough for me to, cover the Packers and, GM of the Lions at the same time, a conflict of interest, I guess, but we'll make it work. All right, let's stick with some NFL coaches. Let's stick this time in the same division. Matt Nagy and the Chicago Bears. I feel like it's a kiss of death, Tony, when an offensive-minded coach gives up play calling abilities to an offensive assistant. It didn't work with Mike McCarthy in Green Bay. It usually is it's a harbinger of things to come, and that harbinger isn't a very good thing to come. What do you make of the Matt Nagy situation in Chicago? The offense has been abysmal. Obviously, it wasn't just the play calling because they hand over the play calling abilities, and the offense looks even worse this week. So where does Chicago go from here, and how do they find answers on offense?
Yeah, same situation. I mean, unless there's some sort of turnaround, and really it's on the downslide in Chicago after a fast start, everything points to, from what I've heard, from Nagy will be out after the season. I mean, you talk about the fact that here's a guy who was quarterback coach and offensive coordinator in Kansas City under Andy Reid, had a really good first year, and it's not only been downhill for the team and the offense, he's never developed Mitch Trubisky, who's going in reverse. And I think that is a major sticking point. That's a major problem when you have a guy like Matt Nagy, who's an offensive-minded coach who's supposed to be sort of a quote-unquote quarterback guru, and you use such an early selection on a quarterback, and the guy's basically has shown no progress at all. In fact, he's regressed sort of like Sam Darnold with the New York Jets. That is a major red flag. Unless somehow there's some pixie dust thrown on the Chicago Bears and they turn it around, word is Nagy will be out at the end of the season.
So is this a situation where just Matt Nagy is out, or, the person who chose that quarterback for Matt Nagy, Mitch Trubisky, and assisted in hiring Matt Nagy as coach, Ryan Pace? It seems like it's never a good thing when you select Mitch Trubisky over Patrick Mahomes and Deshaun Watson. It seems like that could be a kiss of death, but is this an issue where Ryan Pace is out too and they could do a complete rebuild, or does Ryan Pace get another chance?
And remember, if memory serves right, they traded up one spot to get Trubisky, gave away a bunch of picks, and that was after signing Mike Lennon to a huge contract at free agency. The word is it'll be a total house cleaning, although I should say people I know in Chicago are hoping for and planning on a total house cleaning.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how you can't at this point. I think they've tried a lot of things. Ryan Pace had his opportunity to kind of build that team in his image, made obviously the decisions with the quarterback, the coach. He did everything he could. There were some good decisions. They were a double doink away from, moving on in the playoffs. But, I mean, it just with Mitch Trubisky at quarterback, Nick Foles hasn't worked out. They've tried to patchwork some of that stuff. Just hasn't worked. They've built a really good defense. The Khalil Mack trade worked out great. Some of the things that they've did, outside of the draft, outside of that quarterback position worked out, but just seems like it didn't ultimately work out. And they're 500 teams since the double doink, and seems to be going obviously in the wrong direction with, I think, 3 or 4 straight losses now for the Bears.
And what happens is with that big trade for Khalil Mack, you really have a very thin margin for error because you gave away so many draft picks, and Mack has been a tremendous player. but they've never been able to reload at positions that they need.
No, 100%. And that's obviously been an issue for them. All right, let's stick in the NFL. Any other coaches that you feel could be on the way out just based on their performance so far this season?
Yeah, I poked around, and a lot of people think Doug Marrone's going to be gone by the end of the year in Jacksonville, which I guess shouldn't be surprising. But the fact is that team plays over their heads. I mean, they're losing a lot of games, but they're very competitive, and the team hasn't quit. I think you heard, was it Green Bay last week, said they had great respect for the Jaguars, the way they played. Started off the season hot. They've made a lot of bad choices in the draft. They had that one flash year where they were in the AFC title game and they couldn't pull it through. Blake Bortles, Leonard Fournette never panned out for them. So they've had a lot of players that has not panned out. I think Doug Marrone, it looks like he's going to be out, but I think Doug Marrone's going to fall on his feet somewhere, whether it be as an offensive coordinator or a solid job somewhere, and eventually he'll get another crack at a head coaching job.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, just going back to this last week, the Jaguars were the team that had more energy and fought harder than that game. Green Bay won because of just talent and the fact that it's Aaron Rodgers versus Jake Luton in that game. Otherwise, it's a totally different ball game. But Jaguars played very, very hard. They have a lot of youth on that team. They came out with a ton of energy. And I do think, that was a, well-coached team. You're a Florida team going to Green Bay and 40-mile-an-hour winds in cold weather and nothing to play for. You're 1-7, and you go up and, you play a really great game leading in the fourth quarter against Green Bay. That's an impressive outing. At the same token, I can also understand the fact that this is probably a team that's going to be drafting its franchise quarterback next year at either number 1 or number 2 in the draft. Again, exactly. They want to get this right. And I do think if you don't feel like Marrone is 100% the guy, the worst thing you can do is draft that quarterback and end up in a situation like a Baker Mayfield who ends up with, 3 coaches and 3 coordinators within his first couple of seasons. If you can solidify that spot, get somebody that you think is going to be the guy, and you kind of start fresh, new coach, new coordinator, new quarterback. I get that philosophy because you don't want it to, fail 2 years in and then have to fire Marrone and give your new quarterback, new coaching staff, after a year or two.
The other problem is if you bring in a new general manager, the general manager is going to want to pick his head coach. It's going to be very tough to hire a general manager that says, okay, you get the job, but you've got to keep Doug Marrone for another year or two as the head coach. That usually doesn't work out, as we've seen with the New York Jets.
Those forced relationships just never work, whether it's a coach or a GM having to keep a coach having to keep a defensive coordinator. It's best just to rip the Band-Aid, start fresh, and let the GM and the coach kind of build something together. Very similarly, if I remember correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, but to the 49ers with John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan, although I think they actually hired Shanahan first. Maybe I'm wrong on that. But either way, that's worked out fairly well for San Francisco. All right, let's go back to college for just a second. Let's talk about maybe a potential college coach who could make their way to the NFL. There's been every year this name comes up. David Shaw from Stanford as a potential, coach that could make his way to the NFL. Seems to be maybe a little bit more rumbling this year that maybe he's a little bit more open to it. But I'll, defer to you, Tony. What are you hearing?
Well, he may be open to it, but I'm not hearing a lot of interest in the league. I mean, he could be as a second or third tier candidate. But I think maybe the time has passed for David Shaw to get a head coaching job in the NFL. Stanford has not done all that well. The recruiting has not been that great. They're a program that's been struggling. So I think in years past, when he kind of shut the door to that opportunity, that was his best chance. I'm not hearing there's a lot of interest from Shaw in NFL teams. Somebody told me outright it won't happen.
Yeah, and I can see that. And again, it kind of goes back to the Jim Harbaugh conversation. If you're hiring a head coach, whether it's from college, whether it's an offensive coordinator, whether it's a defensive or whatever, you would preferably like to see that coach have some success in recent history, at least at a high level of success. If you're bringing them in to be the kind of, person who's running the ship for your specific team. So that makes sense. I've got a lot of comments here in our comments section, Tony, about some different head coaching candidates. I know Saleh from the 49ers is one that comes up. There have been a couple other names that have come up as well. Are there any names that you are hearing about that could be in the potential mix for head coaching jobs this coming year?
Well, I mean, we've talked about the couple of guys from Seattle. We've talked about Martindale from Baltimore. You get all the other guys, Greg Roman. I think what happens is, whether it's the Jacksonville Jaguars, Chicago Bears we talked about, it depends on who they bring in as a general manager. Then goes to the coach. You got to wonder who who they hire as a general manager, and then take it from there.
You mentioned that last year on this time, Matt Rule was the name that was generating a ton of buzz. Any name out there that's just starting to gain a ton of traction that you're hearing?
Not from the college ranks. I mean, the hot name in the NFL ranks is obviously Eric Bieniemy. There's a lot of talk about that. I'm told that Bieniemy, when he gets a head coaching job, he's going to kind of buck the trend. And what I mean by that is what head coaches usually do is they bring in assistants that they are familiar with and guys that they are friends with. What I was told last week was that Bieniemy, once he gets his head coaching job, he's just going to hire an all-star cast of assistant coaches, offensive coordinators, defensive coordinators. It's not going to be just a situation with guys that he's familiar with, guys that he is comfortable with. He's going to hire an all-star cast of assistant coaches. Obviously, Bieniemy is the big name. I've not heard of any, especially the way the college season has gone with the delayed start with some of the conferences. I've not heard any of the any names from the college ranks as being must-haves as NFL head coaches.
All right, makes sense.